and we've got three great panelists who also work in and around the neighborhood, coming at this issue of gentrification from a few different ways, and talking about, I'm a little bit hesitant to use the word solutions, because my personal opinion would be that a lot of what we are doing, as frustrating as it may be, I think we aren't necessarily always getting to real solutions. That in fact, a lot of what we're doing is regulating, putting in carrots and sticks, working with different kinds of rules and subsidies and penalties and benefits, and kind of nudging things around and pushing around resources as much as we can. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be doing that, because those are the tools that we have, and that's where we do the work that we get done, and a lot of that work is incredibly valuable and important to people's lives every day. And so, but I want to put that out there, just sort of as a fundamental concept as well. And here, and I would encourage you all to challenge me on that too as we're talking about that. So I'm Mark Fick. I'll be moderating a little bit. I'll be throwing out some questions. I'll be talking a little bit from my experiences along with me today. And I'll ask each of you to just give a little bit more of a bio, because I don't have full background information on you all. But Daniel Spata is with Logan Square Neighborhood Association, works with the Housing and Land Use, he's the co-chair of the Housing and Land Use Committee for LSNA. Lisette Castaneda is with Center for Changing Lives. She's the community engagement coordinator there. And joining us also is Charlene and Andreas, who is with Latino United Community Housing Association, or LUCHA, as more people may know, and works there as the building director in affordable housing development. And as I mentioned, I work in finance generally and development assistance, different kinds of programs. So that's the perspective you're going to get today. And to be honest, while this series, it's been an incredible conversation, and the series, we've talked about economics, we've talked about race issues and culture and social pressures and class issues, and I'd also like to think, as we talk today, about where are we spending our time? Are we missing out on a realm of gentrification that we should be spending more time in, and have that open conversation? So you're going to hear from us for about a half an hour or so, maybe a little bit longer, 40 minutes, and then we want to open it up for conversation and discussion and feedback on what we've been saying. So I'm going to start out with kind of a framing question for folks and just pass it on down the line. But I do want to talk about, from your experience and your work and your understanding of what we're talking about, what is the definition of affordable housing? And for the purposes of this discussion today. And while it may sound like a dumb question, why should we care about having a neighborhood that is diverse, racially, economically, culturally, and the other ways we might think about those elements of diversity? So, Daniel, do you want to give it a try?
Oh man, those are big questions to start with. Okay, my name is Daniel Spata. As Mark said, I serve on the board of directors and co-chair of the Housing and Land Use Committee for the Logan Square Neighborhood Association. Logan Square Neighborhood Association, or LSNA, has been working on affordable housing and a variety of issues for the past 53 years, and I've had the pleasure and the privilege to be working with them personally for the last 10 years as a volunteer. Before that, I worked professionally with a group called Jane Addams Senior Caucus, where we worked with seniors in Uptown and Rogers Park and Edgewater on preserving senior housing for people. I think to talk about what is affordable housing is a challenging question, because that means something different to every person in this room. If I ask you to take a notepad, a note card, and write down what is affordable for me to have a 3-bedroom apartment, we could all hold up 50 different numbers in this room. And I think the challenge is with Logan Square, there's a lot of different income inequalities happening in our neighborhood. So in 2010, the census household median income was $49,600. That sounds great. That makes us one of the top performing neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. The challenge is, if you look at it for white households, that number jumps to $66,000. For Latino households, the household median income was only $34,350. And for African American households, even tougher, $26,600. So when we talk about affordability, what you can afford as opposed to what your neighbor down the street can afford are really different issues. Now, I'm hoping that Lisette and Charlene can elaborate on what that means to the clients that they work with.
Like he said, my name is Lisette Castaneda. I am currently the Community Engagement Coordinator at the Center for Changing Lives. I've been in the neighborhood for almost 21 years. My family bought a 3-flat here in Logan Square when we were gentrified out of Lincoln Park. I got involved as a teenager with LSNA, eventually being the board president and continue to co-chair the committee, the Housing Land Use Committee with Daniel. At Center for Changing Lives, we are a direct service organization, so we work directly with clients on general resource development, housing, financial, and employment needs. We do all of this using a coaching model, which holds that all the clients are experts on their own lives, and we sort of just help them find the right tools and resources that they need in order to solve the problems or solve the issues that they have. Also very much holding that every person is more than just a problem they come in with into our organization. When we talk about affordability, we are a federally and city-funded organization, so we do have a very set standard that we use. The federal government says that if you do not spend more than 30% of your income on housing, it is affordable to you. And again, it goes back to what Daniel said, that everybody uses a different number because it has to do directly with how much we all earn. So again, what is affordable to me may not necessarily be affordable to somebody else. And in general, we use that rule, and we find that in working with our clients, 30% tends to feel affordable to them. Anything more than that, which is happening the majority of the time, is not affordable anymore. We see clients that are spending 75, 80% of their income on housing, especially when they're struggling to stay in this neighborhood that they've grown up in, that they've been here a long time, very often longer than I have. When we talk about why we should care about this issue, I actually feel like I cannot say why you should care about this issue. It is a question of values. I know what things I value, and I know what things make it important to me to care about gentrification. One of the most important values that I hold is diversity. I went to an elementary school and a high school that were extremely diverse at the time, and it was always the place where I felt the safest and where I felt like I learned the most. My parents are immigrants from Mexico, but I knew the dreidel song, and somebody taught me about Hanukkah and Ramadan, and I learned all of these things that were super valuable and have helped shape who I am, and so that's why I care. I care because I care about diversity, and if I care about diversity, I have to care about gentrification. For me, it's the natural place where it ends.
Hello, I'm Charlene Andreas. I am Director of Building Development at LUCHA, Latino United Community Housing Association. I've been there for a little over 5 years now, but the organization has been in the community since basically 1982, addressing housing issues in Humboldt Park, Logan Square, West Town areas. My position there is pretty much directly tied towards the development, rehab of affordable rental housing in the community, whether that's multifamily or single-family homes. So prior to that, I am actually trained as an architect, and I was working on affordable housing as an architect in Chicago. So I've had quite a bit of exposure to it. I'm not a lifelong resident of Chicago, but I have been here for about over 12 years now. So really getting to know a lot of the communities and getting to know Logan Square in the past 5 years I've been around. For me, and I think sort of similar to what Lisette said, is affordability is defined by a lot of the funding sources that we get and the programs that we use at LUCHA. Says that it's 30% of your income. For me, one thing that we work with is HUD has a table that they define what the different levels of 30% is. And they define the Chicago region, which includes actually a lot of the sort of close suburbs. So for Chicago, HUD defines the area median income as $72,400. I think we all know that that's not really likely the case here in Logan Square. There's a group called the Chicago Rehab Network. If you ever go online to their website, they have a lot of great data, especially pulled recently. Getting a little bit outdated now, it's from 2010. where they say the median household income in Logan Square is $53,426. That's median income, that's not necessarily what everybody makes. I think that's where you get back to what they're saying is that if we're talking about 30% of your income, we run into the problem that we have to work within that HUD guideline. So I know that, you know, each one of you is not going to necessarily be at that area median income of 72,000. So how do we work within the programs and the sources that we can get to actually make it affordable to you? So that's where we use different programs like low-income housing tax credits, rental subsidies to make housing affordable. But it's still, I think, an issue where it's hard to break it down to individuals. And that's where I think there's a little bit of a disconnect with the federal programs of how we can really meet each individual's need and the impact of who all really needs affordable housing. As far as diverse neighborhoods, I definitely feel like I'm sometimes an idealist and that I really prefer to live in an area where there's a mix of incomes, there's a mix of age, there's a mix of race. I find that having that brings a great richness to the community. There's different viewpoints, and I think it creates a very livable environment because you need everybody who does different things. I mean, we're not all doctors, we're not all a barista at the coffee shop, we're not all a waitress at the restaurant. We all have different incomes and different jobs that we do, and that contributes to what we can and cannot afford. But I also think it's a richness that we bring to a community.
Thank you. I think next we're going to sort of step back into kind of, the process of development a little bit. And we're not going to talk through all the nuts and bolts, but there is a general way that development happens. The pieces may move around in different ways depending on what kind of a developer you are. If you're a mission-based developer like LUCHA is, or a for-profit motivated developer in the neighborhood. But we kind of know how we've seen it happen around us. We see it, there's a lot of mystery behind the machinations of that sometimes though. But I want to get people's thoughts a little bit here on how do we think we should pursue neighborhood improvement? Because development will happen, it will always happen, and it should happen. A lot of these questions are around control. Who controls it, who benefits from it, and who has sort of choice over how that happens. So I'd like to hear from the panelists about how do we think we can pursue the good kind of development that we want. That is really by and for the community, by the people of the neighborhood that are there. And so that people that are living in a certain community, as development flows through that neighborhood, they can really benefit from that. And essentially what we're asking, the big question that we're asking is it possible to have development without displacement? And what might that look like?
Oh man, the multi-part questions. Okay, so to wrap this into something that my mind can talk about, I'm just going to compare and contrast 3 different models of development that we've seen just in the past 12 months here in Logan Square. Number 1, at the Logan Square Blue Line Plaza, there's talk about the redevelopment of that space. Did anyone go to any of the meetings for that? Raise your hand. Okay, so a good number of people. This was a really great facilitated space over 3 different nights where we talked as a community about what are our values, what do we want to see in that space, how can it reflect our community. It wasn't as diverse of a population as you would like to see, as reflective of the neighborhood as you would like to see. But at the end of the day, I feel like the plan that actually just was released yesterday through email represents really the best interests in a very progressive view of that development in terms of a combination of open space and affordable housing. To contrast that with a couple developments that came through the first ward this year. So PMD is a developer that proposed doing 6 stories, 135 units of largely market rate luxury studios and 1-bedrooms. Brought it to a community group in the first ward. They had a lot of reservations in terms of the density, the scale, the pricing. Voted to the Alderman, wrote him a letter saying, we don't want to see this move forward as the current project. We need more community input. The Alderman did not like that response, so that is where the community process shut off. It went to the Plan Commission, it went to the Zoning Committee with no further public notice, passed through, and now that project, as the developer wanted, is going forward because the Alderman, for the most part, decided to cut off community participation. Now, contrast that with the project that LUCHA is working on, much more modest, 42 units spread over 10 or 11 different 2, 3, and 6 flats. The Alderman instead put them through about 4 different community meetings where it was vetted again and again by the community. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of actual racism, prejudice that came to the surface during those meetings. And even then, we were just able to get that project to the zoning committee now. Both of those processes started this summer. Why was a luxury development, able to move through a community process so much faster than an affordable development? We need to challenge the values and the process that our aldermen are giving us
Yes.
to think about development in the community.
I think that Daniel's points are great, and I think his examples are great. I just want to sort of be very specific about some things, including the fact that not all development is improvement. We've seen that time and time again. And there is also this moment where development is not just a sort of like this influx of good things into the community. Development can give way, and very often does give way, and it is happening in Logan Square. It is giving way to gentrification.
Yes.
There is a line that is constantly being crossed that we have to be willing to talk about. We have to say, yes, we want investment in our communities, yes, we want the good things, but we want to be in control of that process. Very often, I think as a country, we talk about all the things that we lack. And the reality is that we need to start thinking about our strengths, in the ways in which we have enough, in the ways in which the things that we have are abundant if we share them. We know that there is enough. There is simply an unequal sharing of those things that are enough. And so we have to be willing to talk about the fact that we have a lot of great things, and that a lot of great things can happen if we share those things, and if we start from there. If we don't let the aldermen say to us, this is the value that this will bring, we have to say to them, this is our community, and we are in control of this process, and
Yes.
this is what the value is that we want you to add. You cannot be the one to tell us. We have to collectively decide what those values are that we are going to stand on, and what those values that are truly going to mean improvement for us are. And if we decide that our value is diversity and our value is standing against gentrification, then that's when we can make sure that all the development that does come in does not displace, and instead enhances our community.
Right.
I'm probably going to kind of go through several different perspectives that I have. Obviously, like Mark had alluded to before, LUCHA very much prides itself on being a community-based, mission-driven development corporation or a nonprofit. All of our work is really driven by what the community sees as a need, and our work with the community. And one of our organizers, my coworkers are here, and they work very much, they're the ones out there kind of meeting face to face with everybody, discussing the issues, and we try to build off of that with our new developments as much as possible. Sometimes we're kind of limited by all the bureaucracy that goes in with that. We get limited by having to deal with different neighborhood groups and dealing with politicians. So we try to do the best we can within that kind of realm. As an architect, I want to also say that there's several kind of theories and strategies that sometimes, as much as they can relate to one building or one development, they can also relate to an entire neighborhood or even an entire region. One of them is called New Urbanism, and that's basically about trying to create areas where there's mixed use and diversity. That's kind of one of their key bullet points. And instead of having just all homes, you would have a mix of shops, offices, apartments, and homes to mix that. And I think that's kind of something that you see and that we have here, and I think there's part of this issue of preserving that you have a 2-flat, you have a 3-flat, you have a multifamily walk-up apartment building down the street, on the corner. And that's really what I think creates the diversity of Logan Square, and that needs to be preserved. And my concern as an architect sometimes is what zoning allows and what the Alderman will allow, which is, to me, a big concern that I've seen a lot, not only here in Logan Square, but in other neighborhoods where I've lived in Chicago, is allowing you to tear down maybe 2 or 3, single-family homes that have been there forever and replacing them with one large single-family home. Or, sometimes a single-family home on one of the lots, and then they use the other side of the lot as their, yard or their play area. I think zoning and the Alderman need to really kind of bear down on that a little bit more, because it really kind of, I think, destroys the context of that neighborhood. And I think part of the beauty of a diverse neighborhood is having those diverse housing types. So, a 2-flat to me is a great building type, because you could potentially have it as a single-family home, but you could also have it as 2 renters living there under a landlord, hopefully with a nice rental subsidy to make it affordable for some of those. You could have it, a multi-generation family living there. You have the younger, family household living on the ground floor. You have maybe their parents living also with them, and that's, I think, a great model. Something that, that's probably something LUCHA would like to look into. And then, I think the 2-flat, 3-flats are a great housing type. There's a lot of flexibility, and I think that's what we need to look at, preserving those types of housing types to help preserve that kind of diversity and limit that. And I think, too, also sort of limiting what new can be built with the zoning and building codes, that type of information.
Sorry, one of our panelists couldn't show up, so I'm going to step in. My name is Moskowitz. I was a founding member of your Somos Logan Square with Paul, Amy, and Marty. None of whom are going to take recognition for the work they've done, except for Amy and Paul. But it looks like I'm Mark. That's okay. If you guys see Marty over there, just give her a hug and a high five because she's for real.
Ooh, we love you, Marty.
Yeah, so just I guess super quick, just so you know who I am. I used to work for Metropolitan Tenants Organization. My last campaign there was the massive efficient evictions that happened this last winter. And I've been living in Logan Square for a couple of years, but that campaign really forced me to pay attention to the impact of my impact of moving into the neighborhood and what that did. And we tend to talk about gentrification as like a Starbucks moving in, or as like white joggers, which somebody mentioned with last. But I think it's important to keep in mind that gentrification is also mass eviction. It's also homelessness, right? It's also people dying of hypothermia. And that really forced me to pay attention to it. So in response to Mark's question, I just want to mention one thing. I'm by no means an expert on development, but I think something that is important to keep in mind is that you can't have, gentrification isn't just like a neighborhood and then capital comes into it, right? Gentrification can't happen without a simultaneous process of whatever the opposite of development is. Maybe disinvestment, I don't know, undevelopment? So for example, when we were looking at the Fishman campaign, we noticed, Wells Fargo has loaned $50 million to Fishman over the last 2 years. You might remember Wells Fargo from the foreclosure crisis, right? So Wells Fargo in 2007, 2008 is foreclosing on thousands of homes in Chicago, probably even in Logan Square. And then a couple of years later, is profiting on all of the displacement, right? Simultaneously, we think about development as this capitalist process, right? It's developers come in and they might not be good or they might be good, but we need their money. One of the biggest landlords in Chicago, if not the biggest, is the CHA, right? I think they have 25,000 units and they fund something like 35,000 vouchers. What they get funded for is a different story. But there are 900 units laying vacant at Lathrop Homes right now, right? So these are we tend to think about gentrification as this process of going up, and maybe that's really problematic for some people, but it's still going up. No. There's a simultaneous process of going down and disinvestment and conscious choices by government and major capital to kick people out and remove the opportunities that people have for stability. So I think it's important that if we're talking about solutions to gentrification and ways to protect diversity and increase diversity, we don't just talk about how we can increase community development and protect and use that for community stability, but also how we can combat the disinvestment that is recent and still ongoing in the community as well.
So some comments on development, in particular, the process. So I heard a lot about essentially what I would call democratic economics, organizing as strategies, as sort of processes, as systems that we can pursue that exist in many ways already. We don't necessarily always call them democratic economics, but that's some of that participation that's in there. And so these are real things that we have, tools that we have to engage in, and I want to make sure we can come back to some of those again as well. Moving from the development process in particular, and opportunities that we have to step in and manipulate that and change that. As we've learned and talked about over the last few sessions of this series, it's not development alone. There are other issues of crime, issues of how we address crime, issues of just other origins of poverty that exacerbate these issues. And Chicago has a notorious history, and many other major metropolitan areas, follow suit in this. I think Chicago is generally, if you watch sort of segregation of communities, it may be a little worse than many other urban areas, of really just saying, okay, here's a troubled neighborhood. The first wave is we deal with crime, so we're going to send a lot of police in and just arrest a lot of people and really clamp down on that, and then it makes it safe for the next wave to come in. And what we end up doing is really pushing poverty around. It's wealth that sort of chases poverty around the city. We heard from a few people, and we've heard from previous people in the series of, I lived in Lincoln Park, and we got pushed out. We moved up to Rogers Park, we got pushed out. We moved into Logan Square, getting pushed out. How do we think about the other elements of gentrification, and are there tools that you see, approaches that you've seen that are starting to say maybe there's a different way of thinking about the issue of crime and how people are affected by that, issues of poverty, either preventing that or addressing it as it comes up. And I think, Lisette, you may have a little bit more because you're working in more sort of directly with individuals on service provisions and resource provisions and things like that too. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts on those.
So like I mentioned earlier, Center for Changing Lives does direct service. We work with people on employment, on financial, and on general resource development. It means, how do we beef up our networks? For many of us, a lot of what we have comes from the opportunities we've had in our life. Whether it was the person who was like, I know somebody who's looking for a roommate, why don't you go over there? I know somebody who's looking for, a job, and this other person that I know has that connection. Center for Changing Lives tries to be that network for people who have lost that for whatever reason. And they are very often reasons related directly to poverty, gentrification, and having to move, and displacement, and homelessness, all of it. And so within the Center for Changing Lives, we do have this very strong belief in this vision that we work towards, which is a community that thrives. And we realize that, again, as part of that network of sharing and working towards that vision, we believe in what we call radical acts of sharing. That idea that we all have something to share, we all have something that we can share with our neighbor, and part of it comes because of what I mentioned earlier, which is this idea that we all have enough. Often when we think of sharing, it's the scary thing. I think of kids who don't want to share their toys because it's ours and it's mine, and mom got this for me. But the reality is that there is always something we can share, and if we really think about it, there's probably something we're willing to share. It's a connection, it's a skill, it's this just this other extra little thing that we're like, oh, well, you know what? I do know of this one place that might be giving away this thing that you could probably use. And so for us, working in that model is really what allows us to help our clients achieve whatever their goals are for their life. It sort of goes back into the bigger picture of displacement and poverty and gentrification, because again, if we realize that there is enough for all of us, that there's enough space for all of us, it means that our clients don't have to move. If when you buy your 3 flat, you don't have to displace everyone, and you don't because you realize that there is a way to work with the current tenants, that solves some of the problem. And so we are also totally willing to say it is the little steps at a time sometimes. For us, we change one life at a time. We sort of go one way, one little piece at a time. But this has obviously been something that affects us as an agency as a whole as well. We just this month completed our move, and we've moved half a mile west. And, this is Kimball and St. Louis, which is actually, we are the first tenants in the commercial space of the Spata apartments. And we're really excited because that's a campaign that many of us worked on. Somebody always reminds me that I'm still traumatized by working on that campaign. It was hard, it was awful. The neighbors hated us, there's still this involuntary reaction when I think of that. But part of the reason why the move also made sense in that direction was because it's all just being pushed. The poverty, the crime, all of that, our clients, the people that used to be your neighbors, are all just being pushed west. And it's harder for them. One of the big decisions for us was that if we moved that further west, there would be a north-south bus, which we hadn't had access to before in our previous office, because the Kimball bus is really close. And so these are the things that our clients use to access our services. We also last year started taking our services mobilely. We go into 4 different shelters and we go to them because our clients kept saying to us, we really like what you do, but I am homeless, I'm in a shelter, all the shelters are on the south and west sides, a couple sprinkled uptown. We can't make it to you because we don't have money for transportation. So we have gotten creative and we've said, well, you know what, we'll come to you. But again, we're seeing the same problems that we used to see. We're seeing the same problems that caused Humboldt Park United Methodists to found our agency 25 years ago. We're just seeing them in different parts of the city.
I was hoping that Lisette would go first because I know that you work so directly with those clients and your passion always comes through when you speak on their behalf. For my wife and I, what made this a real issue for us is if you go over to Belmont and Kedzie, there's that overpass where 90 comes through. There's a lot of homeless folks who have slept under there for years. If you were paying attention, this past year, you saw these wooden structures start to come up, and then you saw them filled in with concrete. And then Daryl Holiday, who's our great local reporter, actually did a story on this. And it turns out that Alderman Cologne wasn't per se against homelessness, against people being homeless. He was just against them being homeless in his ward. He literally just wanted people to be homeless somewhere else. And so created these concrete structures specifically for the purpose of getting people to move elsewhere. And if we hadn't gotten to the point where we can at least treat people like human beings, then you've really got some work to do. You've got some work to do just to build up to basic values. And so the community was able to meet with him, was able to at least get those structures, which actually are a safety hazard to a certain extent, not put up on the south side. And now we're working with him on kind of this sharing homegrown model that New Community Covenant Church at least is thinking about right now, of tiny houses. So mobile structures that could be your residence during the day and then could be parked and transported to the parking lot of a nonprofit or a church or something like that at night. So what are these homegrown solutions that we can find for homelessness while we are waiting and waiting and waiting for supportive housing, safe, stable, affordable housing to come to Logan Square? And I think to just touch on for me, why I think diversity and pushing back against gentrification is so important is because I think we can see in Chicago that the opposite of a diverse, culturally and economically diverse neighborhood is a segregated, high poverty or high income communities. And those don't work for anyone. If you're in a high income community, you're lacking perspective, you're lacking a diversity of experiences for yourself, for your kids. If you're living in a high poverty neighborhood, chances are you're being exposed to higher crime, lower performing schools, and disinvestment because of a disinterested alderman and disinterested developers. So if we want a Chicago that really works for everyone, then I feel like a diverse, stable neighborhood is something that we have all an interest in fighting for.
Thanks. I don't know if anybody else wanted to comment on that. We'll move on to that. Okay.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what LUCHA is doing beyond just So I'm involved with the development side, but LUCHA does a lot more than that. LUCHA does housing counseling. We do pre-purchase home buyer counseling. People who are in foreclosure, we assist them with counseling and trying to get loan modifications. But I think a program that I've really kind of come to appreciate a lot more in the past probably year, because I've had to be more involved with that for various reasons, is sort of we have a program for seniors where we can go into their home and help make modifications to their home so that they can stay in their home and stay in the neighborhood. We had another program through the state, which was to allow modifications for seniors and people with disabilities. In going through that program, I met some people in the neighborhood, which to me, there needs to be a program out there, and I don't know how we would get this funded, is to help people to invest in their homes who are maybe elderly or in a situation where they don't have the source of income to make the repairs for a new roof or get new windows. Or because I went into 2 homes where we wanted to go in there and make a modification so that the bathroom was more accessible to the homeowner. And we couldn't, and it killed me because, they had, old wiring, and if we brought, with the program, we would have to bring in a building inspector, and we know what building inspectors are gonna do, they're gonna bring up a whole bunch of other issues, and now it's just a can of worms that, we just didn't wanna bring the homeowner into that, so unfortunately, we had to sort of walk away from that, at least through that program. We've tried to get them help through other programs, but it's not the same value, it's not the same amount of money that could make that fully accessible bathroom. So I think more programs like that need to be out there that are addressing people that are currently living in a home, have been in the neighborhood for a long time, and preserving that home so that it can stay there, preserving it so it doesn't become distressed, and then we have disinvestment, and then we have people moving out, we have crime because people don't think anybody cares anymore. So that's, I think another program that we can look into is trying to find that. But also as a community, I think, and as churches, groups that are really, collaborative, like what I see here, is kind of know your neighbor, know like what they're going through. Like, do they also have a health problem and they're kind of falling behind in their home payments, or they can't keep up their yard, or they can't, maintain their property? Like, get engaged and create block clubs so that who's suffering and kind of help them to maintain their home. And another thing which we might talk about later is like coming together. Maybe there's a way to invest in a block almost so that you share that responsibility and you preserve that so that you don't get this developer coming up and buying one house, fixes that up, and then kind of moves down the block kind of thing.
That's really awesome. I should mention actually that when we've had these tenant organizing campaigns, CCL has provided like an invaluable service in being able to provide like a cushion, because there are always risks inherent with organizing, so thanks for that. There's another anti-homelessness strategy, which is like a little older, it's called squatting. And it's important to keep in mind that, like, I just want to keep hammering this in, that like the foreclosure crisis and the gentrification crisis are not separable. Even in the heart of Logan Square, you have tons of vacant homes, right? Homes that people couldn't afford, regular, like middle-class people, working-class people, poor people couldn't afford, but they're vacant. And if you think that the foreclosure crisis was the fault of the banks, and it was illegal, and it was fraudulent, then you have to think that it's okay for homeless people or poor people to go into those homes and to take them. Like some of our comrades in Rogers Park, were evicted, Gerardo and Maria were evicted from their home 3 years ago. They occupied a vacant home and were able to stay, and since then have turned it into a community center. They've invested in the block. They have a community garden, they have events out there all the time. Rebecca Burns is the writer for In These Times, and she's working as part of that campaign. If you're interested in learning more about that and learning about home occupation and squatting as a strategy for helping people not be homeless and not die of hypothermia, and also building political will, sort of like building this sense of community. You can see her after the event. Is that okay?
Great, thanks. The themes I was hearing there were around changing our relationship to each other a little bit and changing our relationship to our property a little bit, the land that we're developing. And I'll take Charlene's cue to go ahead and talk about co-ops, which is kind of my thing. And because I want to put that out there as one actual practical, again, I don't know if it's a solution, but it is a tool that we can use. And it's not for everybody, but it can work well for a lot of people. And that's limited equity cooperative housing. Essentially what's happening in that dynamic, and it's a bit of what you're touching on, Charlene, is that we're saying we're going to say that this land has a different purpose and a different value is going to be applied to this land than what the rest of the market is applying to that land or any other piece of land. And we're going to remove that land, whether it's a single house or a multi-family building or an entire block. We're going to remove that land from the market and say that we as residents and as a community will decide what the value of this property is. And this is perfectly legal, surprisingly enough. And it happens quite often. In fact, I see at least 3 or 4 people in the audience who participate in this model of housing. And essentially what you've done, and I'm happy, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the nuts and bolts, I'd be happy to talk to people about later. But you change the buy-in price, whereas, to buy a single-family home, to buy a condo, you need to come up with what the market says that property is worth. With a limited equity option, you've controlled the value of that, and you said, we're going to create a formula that's going to decide this value. And into that formula might go our own priorities, the value of the amount of incomes we have. We might relate to the rest of the economy and what's going on in the economy to create that formula. And that's going to decide what it costs to buy in to get a house. And that is often significantly less than what the market will tell you you have to come up with. So that's one very practical model I'll throw out there. And there are variations on that, like community land trusts. Like I said, when you talk about transforming an entire block or multiple properties in a neighborhood. And these models are successful and they happen all over the country. So I wanted to throw that in, a little plug there. But I think fundamentally what we're doing there and what we're doing with a lot of these things, again, coming back to the basics, is we're changing how we relate to one another, what it means to be a neighbor, what it means to relate to this property that we have. And I want to bring this to a close, at least the formal part here, and then open it up for discussion and questions to talk about some kind of very basic things or events or projects or campaigns or things that you've got going on, things that you're working on that folks in the audience might be able to plug into. If you're interested in working on these kinds of solutions, here's what you do next.
Okay, 2 thoughts. One on developments, one on policies. At some time this year, you're going to hear about zoning public meetings that are going to be happening. There's definitely going to be planning meetings around the mega mall, definitely probably going to be meetings around other projects along the Milwaukee Avenue, Bloomingdale Trail. If you go to the meeting and you know it doesn't represent the community, the diversity of the community, you know that there's not childcare being provided, you know that it hasn't been advertised in Spanish, have a group of people who is prepared to say to the alderman, you can send this developer home. You can send them home. We can wait to do this meeting until you're willing to do this meeting right. Because if we keep doing community meetings that don't represent our community, we're falling into a strategy that is, number one, unhealthy for us, but really is putting the interests of white residents of this community above everyone else in the community. And I know that that is not going to be a solution to gentrification. Number 2, I wanted to bring up something called the Keeping the Promise Ordinance. So talking about the CHA, the Chicago Housing Authority, 2 quick facts. Number 1, over the past 9 years, they have spent far less money than they have received from the federal government, to the tune of collecting a $432 million cash surplus that the CHA is just sitting on rather than building affordable housing. Number 2, they're sitting on housing choice vouchers that low-income residents can take potentially to any landlord and acquire affordable housing. They're sitting on somewhere, 11 would know this better than me, but roughly 9,000 vouchers, 9,000 families that aren't receiving the housing that they deserve. Right now, this ordinance is being sponsored by I think roughly 24 aldermen, including every Logan Square alderman, except for Ariel Roboyres. But Ray Suarez is refusing to bring this to a hearing so that it can be considered and move forward with the city council. Anyone here can call their alderman, who is a sponsor of this ordinance, and say to him, call Ray Suarez on Monday, tell him to call a hearing for the Keeping the Promise ordinance. That is something every single person in this room can do Monday morning. So that's my one homework assignment to this room. Call your alderman, say to him, call Ray Suarez and ask for a hearing on the Keeping the Chicago ordinance. Thank you so much.
Sort of piggybacking off of what Daniel said, I'm going to also go back to what I mentioned earlier about this idea of radical acts of sharing. If you want to get involved, if you want to make a difference, like, you have to participate in a radical act of sharing. They're like the three basic categories for me are time, talent, and treasure. If you have the time, attend these meetings. LSNA has a housing and land use committee. If you want to spend time with our clients, we are developing something we're calling a Skillshare network. You know, it doesn't have to be something super complicated, but if you have the time to sit with someone, help them learn how to use Office, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, whatever, like, take the time to do that. We will absolutely, accept anyone who wants to do that and who wants to participate in our community that way. We're currently looking for volunteers to sit at our front desk because we don't have enough funding to hire someone to just sit at the front desk. So if you have the time to do that, do that. And any of these organizations, the three that we represent up here, and any other organization that you know of that is a nonprofit, I assure you could use like the $5 that made you forego a couple of cups of coffee this week, and like you want to throw that in towards any one of these organizations. We have to be willing to give of ourselves, and sometimes it's a little bit of a sacrifice. It would be a sacrifice for me to go 2 days without coffee. But like, if we sacrifice just a little bit, we can continue to make a difference. We can support the organizations that are making a difference. And you sitting in the room and being an advocate for these values and these things that you believe, and sharing a little bit of yourself, sharing whatever talent you have, these are all things that absolutely make a difference. Not just in the community, but like in individual lives. So I encourage that.
I just personally feel like, get to know your neighbors. A lot of you are doing that, but really even just who's next door to you or down, the next door down, kind of get to know who they are, what they're about. You don't know who lives here, find out who that is, and just kind of find out, try to get them engaged the way you are. For LUCHA, definitely, we try to build as much as possible off of what you, our residents in the community, are seeing or feel is needed for housing. So Alma Samudio, you're here. Could you raise your hand, please? So Alma Samudio is one of our community organizers. She's out there meeting with a lot of you and a lot of different groups like Center for Changing Lives and Logan Square Neighbors Association. We're trying to find out what the issues are. She tries to bring those back to us, and we try to kind of work off of that. So definitely, if you're interested in kind of getting involved with LUCHA, talk to Alma, let her know what you see going on, or like these guys get involved in their organizations. And then we also we have a new development of 42 units of affordable housing for those whose income is at 50% AMI or less. That's called Tierra Linda. If you want to get involved with that, we definitely can use volunteers in all different parts, helping us get the zoning, working with Alderman Moreno. We also have some lots that are in Alderman Maldonado's board, working with us to get them to help us make this and move this forward quickly. And then
I just want to make a quick comment just to clarify. So we do have the support from Moreno. We're just needing the support of all the ballot lots. So there's 3 lots that we still need, and we don't have a hearing. Similar to the city of Changing the Promise, we have to push him to put us on the agenda so that we can go to the hearing and
I just want to, she's saying that we got zoning on the lots in the first ward this past week, which is great. And yes, Alderman, I will say that both Alderman Moreno and Alderman Maldonado support this project, but we have to continue that support going through until we actually are in the ground and we have tenants moving in. At any one point, how Chicago politics work, this could turn around and we could lose those lots. And we also have city funding, we have city tax credits. Anytime that can change. We need the support of the community to show these aldermen that we need affordable housing in this area, that what we're building is needed. And I think just overall support them and talk to them. and your politicians about the need of different types of housing here in Logan Square and preserving what's here, you know, not letting there be a lot of tear downs. So.
Yeah, okay, so I think the only thing that we are Somos Logan Square is doing that's different from what's already been said is that we're doing pretty explicit endorsements of alderman candidates, and we're door knocking for them because, I mean, until we live in like an anarchist classless society, politicians continue to have a lot of power. Right? Politicians continue to be able to just deny zoning changes, which put, you know, dozens of families without homes. So we're going to be hitting the pavement really hard in February because the elections are coming up February 24th. We're probably endorsing Carlos Rosa. We're probably endorsing Judy Garcia, although I got some pushback from that last time. Where's the theory? If there's an alternate candidate that you really think is supportive of your values that we've been talking about up here, please let us know. Come out. There's dozens of you guys in past meetings have volunteered to door knock for GOTV, and that's awesome. But that's one of the ways right now that we can make a difference in the city. I was just going to say one more thing about that. Oh yeah, and it's not to say necessarily that we think that these politicians are saviors. I mean, having voter power and being able to demonstrate explicit voter power to aldermen is extremely important. I think someone in the audience, Sally Heyman, who's able to demonstrate it as well, is that they have a zoning, they just organize the homeowners. And they basically are able to talk to the alderman and be like, hey, this is what the homeowners, this organization of homeowners in your ward wants. And if the alderman doesn't pay attention to that, there are going to be real consequences. And they've been able to put pressure on the alderman to get affordable housing commitments from developers who are trying to do projects in the ward. I think that's incredible. It's just a really powerful, it's a really powerful symptom of being organized in your community. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that we do a lot of tenant organizing. We just found out about a tenant in Albany Park who's gotten a 30-day notice from his landlord in retaliation for the tenant complaining about the issues in the apartment. So we'll probably be doing a call-in day and a picket of that real estate development sometime in the middle of the month. So keep your eyes open for that. Direct action is really important.
One more. Just a quick note. We do have what we're calling a design shred. It's sort of a brainstorming for two of the properties that are part of Tierra Linda, which will be next Thursday from 6 to 9 p.m. at Armando Seguida's property at 1625 North Drake. If you're interested in getting involved with that and having some say in our development, talk to Alma Zavidio. I believe she has some flyers for that.
There is one more ordinance that LSNA is working on specifically. It's called the Affordable Requirements Ordinance. Right now it says that any new development that requires a zoning change and needs makes a significant impact, there has to be 10% of the units set aside as affordable housing or money into a pot that can build affordable housing. It is a very, very broken system, and right now the city is very interested in reforming it, and so there's a coalition that's working with them on reforming it, and it's been an interesting process. The city keeps saying to the coalition, oh, well, you know, you guys are getting so much more than the developers, but I don't know why we should care what the developers are getting. But anyway, so that's what we're working on. And so if you want to work on that at all, you can talk to Daniel or I, or also John McDermott, Housing Land Use Director extraordinaire from LSNA is here, so feel free to talk to him.
Great, thank you. That's a lot of different ways to get involved, a lot of different points of entry for anyone. At first I was a little disheartened because a lot of these solutions were immediately coming with challenges both before and after. But then I am reminded that if change doesn't happen without a little bit of pain and a little bit of tension and giving up a little bit of something, because that's what change is about. And so I think we all have to admit that if we want to change an element of how this stuff happens, we have to be willing to change a little bit about what we do and how we think, and that can be a painful process. So I welcome everyone to appreciate that pain.
Mark,
Yes?
Can I draw back to something that you said earlier? You said that you were worried about the word solutions, that we were here to solve gentrification. Everybody can take a deep breath because we are not here to solve gentrification. If you look at what this said, it was affordability, preserving diversity. Okay, so all we're trying to do is take every opportunity that we can to use affordable housing to preserve the diversity of our community. Whew, okay, all right, that is manageable. That's a lot of little bite-sized steps that we can take. And that's a lot easier than solving gentrification.
Thank you for bringing that back. And my favorite phrase of the panel is radical acts of sharing. I'm going to use that phrase, if you don't mind, for the future. Let's open this up for a little bit. Are we moving right into questions and answers?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, great. So we've got about 20 minutes left here before we're officially wrapping up. I saw a hand right up here.
Some of us were talking earlier. I think I can talk loud enough. My family was evicted from our home when I was 3 years old. This was a long time ago and far away, but on a rental farm. My mother was 3 months pregnant with her third child, and I was the oldest. I was 3. We were forced out of the home, so that goes a long way back into my history. Now my husband and I are very fortunate. We own our home. We also own an adjacent single-family home that my mother used to live in. And we would like to find a way to have both of those homes preserved as affordable housing. That's something that we would like to get back. And I know, this is 2 families, it doesn't solve everything. And we know other people who have the same interests. So we just like to know, how we go about starting to think about that.
There's 2 programs that I'm thinking of. Obviously, some people tend to show when you say Section 8, when you're a private landlord, it's Section 8 is a voucher program that CHA provides, which hopefully we can get them to provide those vouchers that they have. That would be a great use. I think, the biggest way to address affordable housing, in my mind, is, I'm about building people rehabbing, but I think there's a lot of landlords out there that could take advantage of these programs and provide affordable housing in existing building stock. And
I'm thinking more about, my husband and I are older, what about when we die? How do we permanently preserve those as affordable housing in the neighborhood when we're no longer here? That's fine. Because we have tenants living in our house for low rent right now. But
I'm not a legal expert, maybe you know about this, but is there a way to tie a covenant or something of that sort?
You could potentially. There isn't really a program for that. So that's an interesting way to come at that. Now, one possibility is you find an affordable housing developer who manages single-family homes or small properties, and you sell the property to them, and then they put it into their housing stock. But not all CDCs, not all community developments do that model or whatnot. But I think there's maybe a few ways. But that's an interesting part of the solution that doesn't have a program yet, but maybe very well should.
There's another program called CLIP, is the way you pronounce the acronym at Chicago Low Income Housing Trust Fund. They're really probably kind of tight right now to be able to fund new landlords, but it's the same kind of program. They provide a subsidy so that basically the tenant's paying that 30% of their income, and the landlord still gets the market rate rent for that area so that you can afford to operate and own that property. But a lot of these new ordinances that both Lisette and Daniel talk about, and the way I hate the fact that a developer can say, I don't want to build, 20% of my units in affordable housing, instead I'm going to pay this fee. One good thing in that step that I do appreciate is that it goes into the Chicago Low Income Housing Trust Fund and that is paid towards these subsidies.
Yeah, that is an excellent program. And just to tie into that, most affordable housing in the city is not subsidized. It is what we call naturally occurring affordable housing. And it just means landlords, property owners, mom and pop developers that maybe they own a handful of buildings in the west side, south side, north side of the city, and they just charge reasonable, modest rents, and they work with their tenants and they get to know them. And at the Loan Fund, we work with developers like that who are actually really good people, and they develop good housing, and they rent it out at very affordable rates, and sometimes they work with programs like CLIF or a Housing Choice Voucher to make it more affordable for them too. So those things are out there if you want to be a landlord and support some of these opportunities. So,
I just wanted to address Sally's question. So, what you can do is find an organization where you actually create a trust and donate your property with specific parameters that the property be used for. That's when you have to work with an organization because I do that kind of work. And if you put that in your trust and the attorney can draft it for you, if that organization no longer exists or no longer
back over here.
Yeah, well, so I wanted to thank you for kind of the reminder, that we can take this piecemeal and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. But actually, while we have sort of this really incredible forum and great participation, I did want to see if we could talk a little bit about bigger picture solutions that maybe don't seem politically possible now, but might be, we can build a movement with folks who live in other places. So I work with a group called Communities United Against Foreclosure and Eviction, and Noah mentioned briefly. Something we talk about a lot is the fact that in Chicago there are twice as many vacant homes as there are homeless people. So in some cases we might have a problem with the dearth of affordable housing, but in a lot of cases we have a problem with just the fact that there are prohibitions on the housing that exists. So a couple of quick things that I wanted to mention, and that I would just love to hear from the panelists about what you see as sort of solutions that can be cross-organization, cross-neighborhood. I work with a group also called Assoc. It's a new community land trust in Alderman Park. It does exactly kind of what you're mentioning. It's a membership-based land trust, so tenants that commit to being part of it pay property taxes and insurance, and then the rest of it is just people who live in these houses don't pay rent aside from that, but kind of manage them, decide collectively what should be done with the trust with the requirement that it remains as permanent low-income housing. I also wanted to mention briefly, I'm really glad you brought up community land trust. We have a Cook County land bank right now that's poised to use city funding to buy huge numbers of vacant homes and redevelop them. But we don't know, or I don't know yet, I haven't gotten a clear answer about what's going to be done with those homes. Who are they going to give it to? Could we talk about a campaign to push those to be given to the community land trust to make sure that they're affordable? There's a prohibition at the state level right now on rent control of Chicago and there's kind of an interesting backstory to why that is. A lot of cities have rent control. Is that something we could talk about working towards in the future? So I'd love to hear the panelists' thoughts and then other folks in the room. If you have ideas about this, ideas to move forward to what we want Chicago to look like and Logan Square to look like in the next couple of years, but also in 10, 20 years. I think that's also a really important conversation to have.
I can comment on the land bank, but do other folks?
Sure. I mean, on rent control, this is a program that works well in New York. You hear, last Saturday, you heard that 30% of apartment units in New York were under some kind of rent control. The problem is that in Illinois, there's actually a state law that prohibits any town or city from even considering a rent control law. I know, it's crazy. Your face is saying that's crazy, because it is crazy. That is really something that our new state representative and other people really should be considering. Can you repeal this prohibition on rent control so municipalities like Chicago can at least consider a rent control ordinance? Another thing that I've been thinking about, that if we start talking about pie in the sky idea, well, pie like kind of low in the sky ideas. There's a program in Cook County right now called Class 9. If you are a 6-unit or more development, you can get property tax relief for having a third of your units be affordable. That's the quick and dirty way of saying this ordinance. The problem is, in the neighborhood of 2, 3, and 4 flats, a lot of people can't or won't qualify for that program. Is there a way to create a Class 9 type program in Cook County that lets people who have these smaller rental buildings receive property tax relief in return for rehabbing and preserving affordable units within their property? That'd be a great program to try to expand to smaller buildings. But I don't know where the future of that idea is, because right now it's an idea.
I'll go even a little lower than pie in the sky as Daniel, because there are certain things that are already happening that we also have to remember that housing doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like, you can't just solve housing, you've got to solve all the other problems too. So we have to talk about the minimum wage. The city of Chicago just passed like the minimum wage of $13 an hour. $13 an hour is actually still not enough. It has to be like nearly $20 an hour for like a family to be able to really afford what they need. And so we have to talk about that. We have to talk about the fact that in terms of housing, in the city of Chicago and in the state, there's no regulation on using credit to bar someone from renting your apartment. The number one reason for bad credit in this country is bankruptcy. The number one reason for bankruptcy is medical debt. And so things that are outside of our control continue to affect us for a really long time. And a landlord can say, I want you to have a 750 credit score, and another landlord can say, I need you to have an 850, and they're both right because there's nothing regulating that. We have to talk also about the bigger issues, and many of these things already do have campaigns, but we have to talk about them together. Because part of what we continue to do is allow ourselves to be divided, and it's like, well, this is the one issue I work on, and I can't work with you on your issue. But the reality is we have to solve all of them together, otherwise we're not going to solve any of them.
Okay, thank you. One quick comment on and I'll go back to you, one quick comment on the land bank. Just for clarification, a community land trust is different than a land bank. A land trust generally develops, owns for the long haul, operates it as something. A land bank is generally a holding vehicle that takes property from one condition, holds it for future development that is to be determined. Kind of very basic differences there. In Cook County, I think what we have with the land bank is a great opportunity.
That LUCHA did, they had a RFQ or RFP recently for developers to take those homes that the Cook County Land Bank has, and LUCHA has applied for that, and we're hoping this next week to find out that we're one of the approved developers for that program, which allows us then to address the need for single-family housing that's affordable. And hopefully a way to do that, which is not easy. Also, I just kind of want to tag on a little bit to what Lisette said, is that, yeah, I think there's more to housing than just housing. LUCHA definitely is focused on housing. I think we've thought about, what else can we do, and we do feel that that's still our strong point where we're going to stay, but we feel we've partnered with Center for Changing Lives, and we have tenants that have gone to Center for Changing Lives for financial literacy training, or help in finding, workforce development type of services. So we can't, that's just part of this whole, creating a network and collaborating to address this problem.
Thanks. Back over here, yeah.
I have a pie in the sky question. Not necessarily related to development or policy, but to narrative changing investment that makes the narrative go, well, look, these people didn't invest in their community, so now we're going to change it. We did the same thing with our public schools. Oh, look, they're dilapidated. Look, no parents are involved. Look, all the kids are failing, so we need to close them or turn them into something else. But that's an intentional disinvestment. So on the broad scale, this is lovely, right? Because we're all here to be educated about what's happening and better understand what's really at play. How do we do that larger so that the average voter understands that that's what's actually happening? That it wasn't that people didn't care for their communities or their schools. It was that the folks that are supposed to support what they can do to care in their community or their schools are purposefully not doing that.
Can I piggyback on that question?
Sure, yeah.
I'd just like to say that if the median income in Logan Square is $60,000, there are a lot of us who have more than $60,000, and the big problem in this city, country, is income tax, is progressive tax, and this notion that, so part of the way to change the narrative is to start talking about the fact that, the higher income should be taxed much more, and is there a way to at least discuss it locally? And so at least create an option for people who can even voluntarily do this and start supporting the great work you guys are doing. So I think radical sharing is not about $5. It's about real tax, progressive tax, which can help support the things Missy's talking about and keep these neighborhoods alive.
Yeah, so we've got sort of two issues there. We've got an issue of there is a narrative that we all hear, and some of us believe, and some of us question. And then there are, again, related issues around income. As you mentioned, these issues are all tied together. Any thoughts on that?
Okay, cool. So I think, going back to Missy's point, the left or the progressive, whatever, in this country has done a pretty bad job of making the case to the majority of Americans that our interests are fundamentally the same. And I think I just saw the statistic now that the richest 1% of Americans own as much as the bottom 99%. I think when Occupy happened, that wasn't quite true, but I think I just saw something that says it is true. And it's it's worth thinking about that, right? Because practically speaking, there's a huge difference in terms of quality of life between somebody who's pulling in $10,000 a year and somebody who's pulling in, let's say, $100,000 a year. Practically speaking. But if you look at it from the perspective of the person who never works and makes $20 million a year, or like $1 billion a year, those people actually, their interests are materially much closer together, right? It makes much more sense for the corporate lawyer to politically throw their lot in with someone who's surviving on welfare than it does for the corporate lawyer to throw their lot in, I don't know, the wall. Look at ourselves, be like, man, what's the thing that I wish could change? And then get organized around it, no matter what it is, as long as it's acting in solidarity with the rest of the workers in this country. 98% of the people in this country work. Without being like, oh, well, I'm the only one who's oppressed, or like, I'm so oppressed. So having a balance there, but also realistically saying to yourself, like yes, I'm impressed by these people who have so much power, and I can organize with people who are closer to me than that, and we can have power together, and we can change that. Like a lot of the people I went to college with work like 80 or 100 hours a week. That's not life. They make a ton of money. That's not life. That's terrible. But of course, they're the ones who are now saying we need to cut taxes for the rich. I mean, yeah, all that.
So, buying into the irony of white men dominating the conversation. Thank you. Let's maintain control, Mark. I just want to speak to Missy's question real quick about what we tell when we tell the story of Logan Square. And I think there is that narrative that we came to a place of disinvestment. Sometimes when people gentrify or move into a community, you almost think that you were moving into a non-place, that there wasn't culture before you got here. There was nothing happening, and then we created a place. And I feel like that ignores so many valuable contributions of people, the 40, 50 years of Logan Square Neighborhood Association history that made this a safe neighborhood for all of us and for developers to move into. But it also relates to how we talk about Logan Square in social media, over beers, over brunch. When Curb magazine has a bracketed platform of hottest neighborhood, and we all vote Logan Square Neighborhood Association, Logan Square, hottest neighborhood, greatest neighborhood in the city. Guess what? Like we already knew that was a fact, but when we vote in it, when we participate in a developer's online media source for promoting Logan Square as a neighborhood, we're doing ourselves a disservice if we want to be an anti-gentrification community. So think critically about how you're telling the story of your neighborhood next time your buddy from Lincoln Park asks you what you think about living in Logan Square.
I want to go back just real quick a little bit to the bigger picture of taxes, because it plays into affordable housing and it plays into diversity. Because we have, I know Center for Changing Lives has been doing some workshops around property tax, which have been going up, not only for single-family homeowners, but also LUCHA, and it's been a problem for us too. Addressing, real estate property tax equally and sort of fairly for what you're actually getting, just because there's a whole bunch of developers, who have properties earning high income on the next block, doesn't mean that you're earning that same income at your property. So there needs to be a way maybe to look at that. That's something I've actually been trying to work on a little bit through LUCHA. But also just, income tax. I think we all agree, and the whole wage thing, those are big policy issues that we need to, as individuals, come to, raise our voices and kind of bring those issues, because that affects affordability of housing and education and health. So
I'll just add one last thing. Absolutely, for some people, radical acts of sharing is not $5, it is $5,000. Part of what radical acts of sharing is that you are sharing at the level at which you can. And sometimes one of the most valuable things we can share is our story and our willingness to listen to somebody's story. Part of what has happened with the narrative is that we don't talk enough about what we know and what we know to be true and about our own experiences. I think of my mom is someone who, she knows some things, but she also will only know as much as someone tells her and talks to her and makes the effort to talk to the woman who's been in this country like 30 years, her English is still a little bit broken, but she will only know as much as like someone is willing to share with her and vice versa. She will only be able to share her story with someone who is willing to listen. And I think we don't do enough of that either. We don't do enough to share with each other and not just being conscious of the way we represent the neighborhood to the outside world, but the way we are neighbors to each other.
Thank you. I want to also add on that concept of narrative, I think, is even more powerful than we may have given it credit. And that it ties into being able to tell your story, having a place where that story can be a spread and a place where we can critique each other's stories honestly too, I think. I just learned, watching a commercial last night, that the reason we have this great new minimum wage is because of our mayor. And that is narrative, and that is a powerful recreation of what actually happened into a new narrative. That now, unless you dig, and unless you talk to the neighbors, and unless you talk to the people that were working on things for years and years and years and years and years, that's the narrative you hear, so that's the narrative you believe. So I'm glad that was brought up. I need to apologize because we need to wrap up at this point, but I think the conversation will continue downstairs. Okay. Okay, well, let's hear one more narrative, and then I just want to, as I close out my part here, I just want to thank the organizers for pulling this together. This is a beginning. This is a really valuable conversation, but we're still just at the beginning. And as part of that narrative, or part of this learning, we need to continue these conversations, and I look forward to being a part of that to the degree that we can. So,